Look, I need to tell you something that's going to completely change the way you think about your garden. There was a generation of women in the 1960s who knew things about gardening that modern science is only now catching up to. These grandmothers, these incredible backyard chemists, had figured out that a simple brown bottle sitting in their medicine cabinets was one of the most powerful gardening tools ever discovered. And then someone told them to stop. Extension offices sent out pamphlets. Nursery workers shook their heads. Neighbors whispered. The message was clear. Hydrogen peroxide has no place in the garden. Put it away. Use the chemicals we sell you instead. Well, here we are in 2026, and researchers are standing in laboratories looking at data and quietly admitting that those grandmothers were right all along. Every single hack on this list was dismissed, mocked, or outright banned from garden club meetings across America. And every single one has now been validated by science. We are counting down all 25, starting from the least jaw-dropping and building toward the one that will absolutely blow your mind. Stay until the end, because hack number 1 changed how professional growers think about plant biology forever. Number 25. Soaking seeds before planting in a diluted hydrogen peroxide solution. Grandma would drop her seeds into a small bowl of water, mixed with just a few drops of 3% hydrogen peroxide the night before planting. Garden clubs in the 1960s called this dangerous and said it would kill the seeds before they ever had a chance. Here is what was actually happening. Hydrogen peroxide breaks down into water and oxygen. That extra oxygen penetrating the seed coat softens it, kills surface mold and fungal spores that cause damping off, and essentially gives the seed a head start. Modern seed germination studies have confirmed that seeds soaked in diluted hydrogen peroxide germinate faster and show higher germination rates than untreated seeds. Use 1 teaspoon of 3% hydrogen peroxide per cup of water and soak seeds for no more than 8 hours. Number 24. Misting seedlings to prevent damping off disease. Damping off is that devastating condition where perfectly healthy seedlings suddenly collapse at the soil line and die overnight. In the 1960s, Grandma would mist her seed trays with a very light solution of hydrogen peroxide and water using an old perfume bottle she had repurposed. She was told this was wasteful and potentially harmful to tender seedlings. The reality is that the pathogens responsible for damping off, including Pythium and Fusarium species, cannot survive exposure to oxygen-releasing compounds. Modern research confirms that light applications of diluted hydrogen peroxide disrupt the cell membranes of these pathogens without harming plant tissue. Mix 1 part 3% hydrogen peroxide with 11 parts water and mist seedlings every few days. Number 23. Treating root rot in houseplants before it spread to outdoor plants. Grandma knew that a plant with yellowing leaves and soft, mushy roots could infect the rest of her garden if she moved it outside carelessly. She would carefully remove the plant from its pot, rinse the roots in a hydrogen peroxide solution, and repot in fresh soil. Neighbors thought she was performing some kind of odd ritual. Scientists now know she was performing targeted pathogen elimination. The hydrogen peroxide oxidizes and destroys anaerobic bacteria and fungi living in waterlogged root tissue. Healthy roots, which are aerobic, actually benefit from the extra oxygen. Mix 1 part 3% hydrogen peroxide with 2 parts water for a root rinse of about 30 seconds, then let dry before repotting. Number 22. Adding hydrogen peroxide to watering cans for plants that preferred well-drained conditions. Grandma noticed that her lavender, rosemary, and other Mediterranean herbs always struggled in heavy clay soil. She started adding a small amount of hydrogen peroxide to their weekly watering. The garden extension office told her she was wasting her time. What she had accidentally discovered is what researchers now describe as oxygen enrichment of the root zone. Compacted and clay soils have very low oxygen levels, which stresses plant roots and slows nutrient uptake. Adding hydrogen peroxide to irrigation water releases oxygen directly into the root zone, improving conditions dramatically. Add 2 teaspoons of 3% hydrogen peroxide to 1 gallon of water, and use this as a weekly watering solution for oxygen-sensitive plants. Number 21. Using hydrogen peroxide to clean garden tools between plants to stop disease spread. In the 1960s, Grandma would keep a small jar of diluted hydrogen peroxide near her garden bed and dip her pruning shears into it between cuts when dealing with diseased plants. Fellow gardeners told her she was being overly cautious and wasting time. Modern plant pathology completely vindicates her. Bacterial and fungal diseases like fire blight, black spot, and powdery mildew spread easily on contaminated cutting tools. Hydrogen peroxide is a broad-spectrum antimicrobial that deactivates these pathogens on contact without leaving toxic residue. Use full 3% hydrogen peroxide straight from the bottle as a tool dip between plants, allowing 30 seconds of contact time. Number 20. Spraying hydrogen peroxide on compost piles to speed up decomposition. Grandma would occasionally splash her compost heap with hydrogen peroxide, particularly during dry spells when decomposition seemed to stall. Composting purists in her era said she was disrupting the natural bacterial colonies in the pile and doing more harm than good. Modern composting science tells a different story. While hydrogen peroxide does temporarily reduce some surface bacteria, it dramatically increases available oxygen in the pile, which is the primary limiting factor in hot composting. This stimulates aerobic bacterial activity and speeds up the entire decomposition process. Dilute 1 cup of 3% hydrogen peroxide in 1 gallon of water and pour over a dry, stalling compost pile once a week. Number 19. Treating fungal infections on roses before they spread to other garden plants. Rose black spot and powdery mildew were the bane of every 1960s gardener. While her neighbors were buying expensive copper-based fungicides from the hardware store, Grandma was mixing hydrogen peroxide with water in an old spray bottle. Rose societies back then explicitly warned against this, claiming it would damage petals and foliage. Multiple peer-reviewed studies have since demonstrated that diluted hydrogen peroxide is as effective as many commercial fungicides for controlling rose fungal diseases, with the added benefit of zero chemical residue. Spray affected foliage with a solution of 1 teaspoon 3% hydrogen peroxide per cup of water, coating both sides of leaves in the early morning to allow drying. Number 18. Treating powdery mildew on squash and cucumbers mid-season. Every gardener who has grown zucchini knows what powdery mildew looks like. That white chalky coating that shows up in midsummer and slowly takes over the entire plant. In the 1960s, grandmothers who sprayed their squash with hydrogen peroxide were told by agricultural extension workers that they were damaging their vegetables and making them unsafe to eat. Hydrogen peroxide actually breaks down completely into water and oxygen within hours of application, leaving absolutely no residue. It destroys the powdery mildew fungal spores through oxidation. Spray a solution of 1 tablespoon 3% hydrogen peroxide per quart of water directly onto affected leaves and repeat every 5 days until symptoms clear. Number 17. Using hydrogen peroxide to sterilize seed starting mix before use. Back in the day, Grandma would pour her potting mix into a tray, drench it with diluted hydrogen peroxide, and let it dry before sowing seeds. She was told this was unnecessary and that she was destroying beneficial organisms in her potting mix. The thing is, store-bought potting mixes in the 1960s were often contaminated with fungal pathogens. Sterilizing with hydrogen peroxide kills these pathogens while simultaneously enriching the soil with oxygen, which actually creates better conditions for healthy root development from day one. Drench new seed, starting mix with a solution of 3 tablespoons 3% hydrogen peroxide per quart of water. Allow to fully dry before sowing. Number 16. Spraying hydrogen peroxide on aphid-infested plants. Most people think of aphid control as requiring either chemical pesticides or companion planting. Grandma had a different approach. She would spray her roses and vegetable plants with a hydrogen peroxide mixture whenever she spotted aphid colonies. Pest control experts of the era told her this was completely ineffective and she needed real pesticides. Modern integrated pest management research confirms that hydrogen peroxide disrupts the waxy coating on soft-bodied insects like aphids, causing dehydration. It also destroys the pheromone trails aphids leave to attract more colony members. Mix 2 teaspoons 3% hydrogen peroxide with 1 cup of water and spray directly on aphid colonies, making sure to coat the undersides of leaves where they cluster. Number 15. Soaking bare root plants before planting. When Grandma received bare root roses or fruit trees through the mail, she would soak them in a hydrogen peroxide solution for a couple of hours before planting. Nursery professionals called this an old wives' tale and insisted plain water was sufficient. Research on transplant stress tells us exactly why she was right. The extra oxygen in the hydrogen peroxide solution prevents anaerobic decay of root tissue during the soaking period, reduces surface pathogens that cause transplant failure, and stimulates the outer root cells in a way that actually accelerates the establishment of new feeder roots after planting. Soak bare root plants for 1 to 2 hours in a solution of 1 teaspoon 3% hydrogen peroxide per quart of water. Number 14. Treating yellowing leaves caused by overwatering. Grandma would sometimes water her container plants straight with a diluted hydrogen peroxide solution when she noticed yellowing that indicated root oxygen deprivation from soggy soil. Her contemporaries said she was making the problem worse by adding more liquid. What she understood intuitively is what soil scientists now call soil redox potential. Waterlogged soil becomes anaerobic and actually toxic to roots. Hydrogen peroxide acts as an oxygen carrier, delivering molecular oxygen directly to suffocating roots and simultaneously oxidizing toxic compounds that build up in anaerobic conditions. Water affected plants once with a solution of 1 tablespoon 3% hydrogen peroxide per quart of water, then allow soil to dry significantly before watering again. Number 13. Using hydrogen peroxide as a foliar feed booster. Grandma noticed that her plants seemed to perk up and grow faster when she occasionally included hydrogen peroxide in her homemade liquid fertilizer applications. Agronomists of the 1960s dismissed this as superstition. Plant physiologists now understand that foliar absorption of oxygen through leaf stomata is actually a real phenomenon, and that increased oxygen availability at the cellular level boosts metabolic processes, including nutrient assimilation. The hydrogen peroxide also cleans leaf surface contaminants that block stomata. Add 1 teaspoon 3% hydrogen peroxide to 1 quart of your usual liquid fertilizer solution and apply as a foliar spray in the early morning once a month during the growing season. Number 12. Cleaning garden pots to prevent disease carryover between seasons. Every fall, Grandma would scrub her clay and ceramic pots with a stiff brush dipped in hydrogen peroxide before storing them for winter. The notion that pots needed to be sanitized between seasons was considered excessive and unnecessary by most gardeners of her era. We now know that fungal spores and bacterial biofilms can survive on pot surfaces for years and immediately infect new plants placed in them. Hydrogen peroxide is particularly effective against fungal spore cysts that are resistant to soap and water. Scrub empty pots with undiluted 3% hydrogen peroxide, allow to sit for 10 minutes, rinse with clean water, and air dry completely before storing or reusing. Number 11. Treating cut surfaces on pruned fruit trees. After pruning her apple and cherry trees, Grandma would apply hydrogen peroxide directly to the fresh cut wounds using an old paintbrush. Orchardists in her day were strong advocates for tree wound paint and considered the hydrogen peroxide treatment amateurish. Modern arboricultural research has actually abandoned tree wound paint entirely and found that clean, oxidized wound surfaces created by hydrogen peroxide treatment heal more effectively by allowing the tree's own callus tissue to form without interference from occlusive sealants. Apply undiluted 3% hydrogen peroxide to fresh pruning cuts with a clean brush immediately after cutting, before any sap flow begins. Number 10. Fighting soil-borne diseases by drenching transplant holes. Before placing a tomato or pepper transplant into the ground, Grandma would pour a cup of diluted hydrogen peroxide solution into the planting hole and let it soak in for a minute before adding her transplant. Gardeners around her called this ridiculous and said she was harming her soil biology. Here is what modern soil science says. Targeted application of diluted hydrogen peroxide to a planting hole creates a brief oxidative burst that eliminates concentrated populations of soil-borne pathogens like verticillium and fusarium right at the most vulnerable point, which is directly where the new transplant roots will first make contact. Pour half a cup of a solution made from 2 tablespoons 3% hydrogen peroxide per quart of water into each planting hole just before transplanting. Number 9. Reviving plants after frost damage. After a late spring frost hit her garden, Grandma would not simply cut back damaged plants and wait. She would spray the damaged foliage lightly with diluted hydrogen peroxide. Other gardeners thought she was wasting effort on plants that were already done for. Plant biologists now understand that frost damage causes oxidative stress in plant cells and triggers cell death cascades. The additional reactive oxygen species introduced by hydrogen peroxide at very low concentrations actually appears to activate stress response pathways in surviving cells, essentially signaling the plant to accelerate recovery and redirect energy to undamaged growing points. Spray frost-damaged plants with a solution of half a teaspoon 3% hydrogen peroxide per quart of water within 24 hours of frost damage. Number 8. Extending the life of cut flowers from the garden. Before placing freshly cut zinnias, dahlias, or roses into a vase, Grandma would add a small amount of hydrogen peroxide to the vase water. Florists of her era considered this completely unnecessary and somewhat eccentric. Floral science has since confirmed that vase water bacteria are the primary reason cut flowers wilt prematurely. These bacteria clog the vascular tissue in flower stems, preventing water uptake. Hydrogen peroxide inhibits bacterial growth in vase water without damaging flower tissue. Add 1 teaspoon 3% hydrogen peroxide per quart of clean vase water, replacing the entire solution every 3 days. Number 7. Using hydrogen peroxide to help plants recover from herbicide drift. In the 1960s, when a neighbor's herbicide drifted into Grandma's garden and damaged her plants, she would spray the affected area with hydrogen peroxide. Absolutely everyone told her this was useless and that chemically damaged plants simply could not be saved. Herbicide researchers now know that many common herbicides work by disrupting specific metabolic pathways and creating oxidative damage within plant cells. Interestingly, the brief oxidative stimulus from very diluted hydrogen peroxide triggers the plant's own antioxidant defense systems, including the production of catalase and peroxidase enzymes, which can partially counteract herbicide-induced cellular damage. Spray herbicide-affected plants immediately with a solution of a quarter teaspoon 3% hydrogen peroxide per quart of water, and repeat after 48 hours. Number 6. Enhancing oxygen levels in raised bed soil over winter. Before putting her raised beds to rest for winter, Grandma would do a final deep watering with hydrogen peroxide solution. Other gardeners thought she was just wasting her supplies. Modern soil ecology has revealed that winter soil preparation is critical because the microbial communities established in fall determine spring soil health. Hydrogen peroxide applied in late fall temporarily eliminates pathogen populations that would otherwise build up over winter under anaerobic conditions created by cold, wet soil. It simultaneously leaves behind oxygen that supports beneficial aerobic organisms throughout the dormant season. Apply a thorough drench of 2 tablespoons 3% hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water to raised beds after the final harvest. Number 5. Treating tomato blight with hydrogen peroxide before it spread through the whole garden. Early blight and late blight were devastating to 1960s home gardens because chemical options were expensive and often unavailable. Grandma would spray affected tomato plants with hydrogen peroxide at the very first sign of those dark lesions appearing on lower leaves. County agricultural agents told her she was wasting her time and needed a copper fungicide. Multiple modern studies have shown that hydrogen peroxide applications at early infection stages can halt the progression of both early and late blight by oxidizing the fungal and oomycete cell walls before the infection fully establishes. Spray the entire plant, including stems, with 1 tablespoon 3% hydrogen peroxide per quart of water every 3 to 4 days at first symptom appearance. Number 4. Accelerating the breakdown of thatch in lawns. This one surprised researchers when they first studied it. Grandma would occasionally pour diluted hydrogen peroxide solution across patches of her lawn where thick thatch had built up. Lawn care specialists told her she was going to kill her grass. What she was actually doing was stimulating the exact biological process that natural rainfall accomplishes through its naturally elevated hydrogen peroxide content. Rain contains trace amounts of hydrogen peroxide that contribute to thatch decomposition. Grandma was essentially supercharging that natural process by increasing the concentration just enough to accelerate aerobic microbial activity in the thatch layer. Mix 1 cup 3% hydrogen peroxide with 5 gallons of water and apply over thatchy areas using a watering can. Apply once monthly during the growing season. Number 3. Boosting oxygen levels around newly planted transplants during summer heat. During hot, dry summers in the 1960s, Grandma would give her freshly transplanted vegetables and flowers a weekly watering with a hydrogen peroxide solution for the first month after transplanting. Nursery professionals told her she was overcomplicating things and that plain water was all plants needed. Modern transplant physiology research reveals that the number one cause of transplant failure in hot weather is not water stress, but oxygen stress in the root zone. Hot soil is depleted of oxygen. New roots arriving from a nursery pot into hot, oxygen-depleted garden soil experience severe stress within the first weeks. Regular diluted hydrogen peroxide waterings maintain adequate oxygen levels in the root zone during this critical establishment window. Water new transplants with 1 tablespoon 3% hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water once a week for the first 4 weeks after planting. Number 2. Preventing and treating fungal gnats in seed trays by drenching the soil. Fungus gnats were a persistent problem for indoor seed starting in the 1960s. The larvae of these tiny flies live in moist potting soil and destroy young seedling roots. Grandma would periodically drench her seed trays with diluted hydrogen peroxide. Everyone told her this would kill her seedlings. Here's what actually happens. Hydrogen peroxide solution drenched through infested soil creates a brief but intense oxygen burst as it contacts organic matter. The larval stage of fungus gnats cannot survive this oxidative burst because their respiratory systems are incompatible with rapid oxidation. Seedling roots, being aerobic organisms, actually benefit from the increased oxygen availability. Drench infested seed trays from the top with a solution of 1 tablespoon 3% hydrogen peroxide per quart of water. You will see the fizzing action as it works. Repeat every 5 days for 3 treatments. And finally, the number 1 hack. The one that professional plant scientists genuinely did not expect to hold up under scrutiny. Grandma used hydrogen peroxide to wake up dormant or struggling plants that everyone else had already given up on and thrown away. She would take a plant that had gone completely dormant, looked completely dead, showed no signs of life whatsoever, and she would water it thoroughly with a stronger hydrogen peroxide solution. Neighbors told her she was a stubborn eccentric who refused to accept that a plant was dead. What she had stumbled upon connects to one of the most fascinating discoveries in recent plant biology. Plants that appear dead but retain viable meristematic tissue in their roots or crown are often trapped in a state of enforced dormancy caused by anaerobic soil conditions. The soil around their roots has essentially run out of oxygen, and the plant has shut down all metabolic activity as a survival response. Hydrogen peroxide delivered to these roots creates a sudden oxygen-rich environment that can trigger the cellular signaling pathways responsible for breaking dormancy. Researchers working with native prairie plants, bulbs, and perennial species have documented revival rates that astonished them when oxygen enrichment was applied to plants that all external indicators suggested were dead. Grandma was accidentally performing emergency oxygen resuscitation on her plants. Water the entire root zone of an apparently dead but potentially dormant plant with a solution of 3 tablespoons 3% hydrogen peroxide per quart of water. Wait 10 days before deciding the plant is truly gone. If you have been struggling with any of these garden problems, pick one hack and try it this week. Start with the seed soaking before your next planting or the foliar spray if you have something struggling right now. Then come back and tell me in the comments what happened. I want to hear your results.